conclude our study on the book of Acts, or Acts of God as it is known in the New Testament, we look at Paul's or Apostle Paul's missionary journeys. Now, the Apostle Paul, after his dramatic conversion in Acts chapter 9, went out as a missionary to spread the gospel. And Apostle Paul is known as the greatest missionary of the first century, and maybe even now he can be considered as the greatest Christian missionary who did the gospel work. Now, as we study Paul's missionary journeys, there are supposedly 3 missionary journeys that Paul undertook. And this is the first missionary journey. Now, we have a set of information here that comprehensively gives us an understanding of Paul's first missionary journey. So, in Acts chapter 13 and 14, we read about Apostle Paul's first missionary journey. And the timeline is 47 to 48 AD. That is when Paul undertook his first missionary journey. And in that missionary journey, it was Paul and his companion Barnabas, as well as John Mark, who went on this missionary journey. Now, very importantly, Paul and his companions were commissioned by the Holy Spirit, first of all, and then the Christian community who sent them out after commissioning them into this missionary journey. Now, here is a list of places where they traveled. So they started in Antioch, and then they sailed to Cyprus, and then they walked to Paphos, and then they sailed to Perga, move on to Pisidia, and then Iconium, Lycaonia, Derbe, and a few other places before they head back to Antioch. Now, the 2 or 3 important modes of transport that was used on the missionary journeys then was by sea, of course, where they sailed from one place to another. And then they also walked. So sources tell us that from Cyprus to Paphos, they walked about 145 kilometers. That's a long journey. So the third mode of transport was believed to be the horseback. Now, as we look at these places that they went to with the gospel and the modes of transport that they used, we understand why their missionary journeys was so long. This is 2 years of missions and mission work. So obviously today, in times when we have air transport, which makes it very easy for us to travel from one place to another, our missionary journeys may be much, much shorter. But as we look at these important points from Paul's missionary journey, we understand a lot of his missionary journey. Now, what were the activities that they were involved in on their first missionary journey? Firstly, they preached the gospel. Jews' synagogues, and then they went out to the Gentiles when they were rejected by the Jews in their synagogues. Now, mission, Christian mission, and the main purpose of mission is to preach the gospel, share the gospel, spread the gospel to different places. So they preached the gospel, and then they did miracles in the power of the Holy Spirit. Specifically, 2 miracles that Paul did in his first missionary journey. Then, halfway through or somewhere in the course of the journey, John Mark leaves them and he goes back to Jerusalem. And while on this missionary journey, they faced jealousy and abuse from the Jews. And in some places, they were expelled. They also faced severe persecution on the journey. And then they preached the gospel to the Gentiles also. So, these are very important activities and what they went through on the missionary journey. So, it clearly tells us that Christian mission work is not easy. There will be opposition, there will be persecution, there will be abuse and jealousy. But in the face of all that, Paul and his companions took the gospel to different places. Now finally, as we conclude this first missionary journey, there is a very important point to ponder. And that is, how many missionaries have our churches sent? If you're a church leader, if you're a pastor, the question is, how many missionaries have you trained and sent out to the mission field for the sake of